All right, great. That's a little easier. Our first reading this morning is a poem by the writer Anna Elkins. It's a reflection on her something that happened while she was hiking in New Zealand at a place called The Remarkables. I don't know what it is, but I think I would like to visit a place called The Remarkables. The poem is called "If We Are All Unremarkable Angels." And this is what it says. After a long morning of hiking and getting lost, I walked to the pebbled edge of the lake to wash my feet. When I looked up, a toddler with a smile of pure and fearless joy was running up to me. He stopped short, bent down to select a stone, and handed it to me, his face full of a hope so bold it was a knowing that I'd think his gift as rich as gems. I smiled back. Like he had bowed to choose this gift, I bowed to accept it. I held the stone in my open palm to give it proper honor, loving not just the gift, but how it came after the thought to give. He'd approached me empty-handed, found what he needed just when he needed it, nothing planned or stockpiled, as would be my way. I said, "Thank you," and put the stone in my pocket. He ran back to his father, mother, sister. A beauty suffused the whole family. Maybe they were angels. Maybe we all take turns playing angel. Maybe I did earlier for another child who'd come running down the mountain crying, "Can you help me? I'm lost." So we all are so often. And then we're found. Someone appears, leads us back up the path, or offers us a talisman of praise, and once again, we're good enough for now. We're all unremarkable angels. Then the assigned Bible reading for the day comes from the Gospel of Mark. It sets the scene as happening on that day, by which it means the evening of a day when lots of people had gathered around Jesus to hear him talk in cryptic stories called parables. And this is what it says. On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's go across the lake to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat just as he was, whatever that means. Other boats were with them. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped, but he was in the stern asleep on a cushion. And they woke him up and said, "Rabbi, don't you care that we are dying?" So he woke up, and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Hush, be still." Then the wind ceased. There was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still not have trust or faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who is this that even the wind and sea listen to him?" That's the gospel reading. I learned a new word this week, hesychast. Hesychast. Remind me to tell you about it later. I know you will be, can't wait. But I'm going to start with something else. When Kathy and I were in Maine, at the end of May, visiting her parents had just read the book by Tim Alberta called "The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory: American Evangelicals in an Age of Extremism." Has anyone read that or heard of it? No, okay. He is, I'm surprised, if you do much listening to NPR, there has been a greater than average chance that you'd have encountered it somewhere in the past few months, because people are really interested in interviewing him about this book. Tim Alberta is a white evangelical Christian whose father was a white evangelical pastor, and Tim Alberta, his father died some years ago. Debbie Walter read this. He told me that I should read it. Tim Alberta is deeply disturbed by the white evangelical embrace, his people's embrace, of a politics and a political figure that stand in stark contrast to the Jesus of the Gospels. We know this refrain by now, that in their search for cultural and political power, many white evangelicals have cast their lot with a narcissistic criminal with strong tendencies toward dehumanizing women, people of color, immigrants and refugees, poor people, queer people, people with disabilities. It's hard to square that with Jesus. But Alberta takes us into churches like that of a tent revivalist who forbade face masks even in the thick of the pandemic, or the pastor who gets the liveliest responses from his congregation each week during the part of the service where he goes into disinformation-filled political rants. In his interviews with these pastors, a lot of these pastors seem to show some political, or some self-awareness that maybe even borders on reflectiveness, might even hold shades of embarrassment, but 2-1 when he follows up later, when they're back out in the wilds, they have reverted to just the same thing. Alberta seems astounded and confounded by this, as did my lovely and beloved evangelical in-laws, which makes it an important book, because it has the potential to stir necessary conversations among the people who need to be asking those hard questions about their religious tradition and about what the heck their churches are doing, even if the folks who ask those questions too loudly or too publicly often find themselves out of step with their churches or sometimes even kicked out of them. But there was something about the book that left me dissatisfied as well. Because Alberta seems to suggest that what we're seeing today is something new, or at least an outgrowth of some particularly cynical moment in time that happened maybe a few decades ago and is really flowering now. But what he misses is that this stuff has always been present inside American Protestantism. As the religious historian David Hollinger recently put it in a blog post, Alberta and a handful of other evangelicals, white evangelicals like himself, seem to, and here I quote, conclude that people and groups with a novel sensibility had hijacked what had been, until their arrival, a wholesome, democracy-affirming, and love-centered evangelicalism. The actual history of the United States invites a deeper critique. He goes on to say that long before the present era, evangelical Protestantism as a lived faith in the United States carried strong nationalistic, anti-statist, xenophobic, white supremacist, and misogynist and homophobic elements, which is not to say that every evangelical held or holds those ideas, but an awful lot did and do. In a book that he published last year, Hollinger, the same author, traces the diverging threads in American Protestant Christianity over the last century. In the 1970s, people started to notice that the particularly mainline Protestant churches, your Methodists, your Lutherans, your Episcopalians, etc., the United Church of Christ, that the attendance in those churches and membership started to decline as attendance at conservative white evangelical churches started to rise. That was a noticeable phenomenon. And there were some scholars, particularly those who were rooted in those churches that were growing, who made the argument that said, well, those liberal churches don't ask enough of people. They're not asking enough of people. The conservative ones are asking people to really commit to something, which people want. And that's why folks are leaving the liberal churches and going into those conservative evangelical churches. And that argument held pretty solid for a long while, and you might still hear it today. But Hollinger argues that when you look at the evidence, there are a lot of factors that led to this shift. But one of them is the exact opposite of that. If you want, I'll send you a link to his blog post, or I'll lend you my copy of his book. One of the factors that he says is this, that in the mid and late 20th century, the mainline denominations were going through processes of challenging white supremacy and misogyny and homophobia and colonialism. They were asking people to start examining themselves and change their approach to living, and that people left precisely because liberal churches were asking too much of them, and they wanted to go into churches where folks looked like them and thought like them, and they didn't have to challenge their own sense of superiority. They didn't actually have to do anything different, except maybe say the right words about what they believe and say the right words about what proper human sexuality is, regardless of whether they were living that way or not. Denying climate change, or in fact, seemingly out of spite, propping up and embracing fossil fuel production and use that continues to hasten it, defunding food stamps, defunding programs that give poor school children lunches during the summer, threatening mass deportations of immigrants and refugees who, quote unquote, pollute the blood of the nation, flaunting their idolatry of guns, proposing law after anti-trans law that is dangerous to the physical and the mental health of vulnerable young people. These do not seem to be virtues that are consistent with the Jesus of the Bible. And yet, there is a particular religious identity that we find prevalent among people who are driving these very things. Christianity, if I may give the gospel reading a metaphoric turn, Christianity is the storm. It is the raging sea that threatens to swallow people. At least the Christianity that a large portion of the American public seems to buy as the authentic version is. How's that for irony? Jesus in a storm ultimately calms it, but he didn't expect that it'd have to calm it if we read this story. Jesus offers a boat that is safe in the storm, but it's people wearing his name today who threaten to capsize that boat. Hollinger, the historian, notes that progressives have largely surrendered the label of Christianity to its most conservative expression. This isn't the case across the board. Every power interfaith justice action that I have been to has plenty of people whose advocacy is rooted in their Christian faith and their other faith traditions. And I wonder what it would look like to stake a claim in the label more robustly. In fact, when we receive new members in this church, we recite this statement together when we welcome them. Dan, I'll ask you to put that slide up, because what the heck, why don't we recite it together just to give ourselves a little bit of practice saying it together? We celebrate with you this spiritual home. Honoring the diversity of paths to God, we welcome you to this faith community with open hearts and open minds. We value the life and teachings of Jesus. We are called to act for justice, to honor the earth, and to trust the transforming power of God. We invite you to join us in being a living sanctuary that ignites the inner spirit to participate in God's ongoing creation. Thank you. I can go back down. This is a statement of Christian faith. This is a commitment to being the boat in a raging storm. So that word that I learned, I know you have hardly been able to wait for this, hesychast. This is actually a small detour, so just indulge me. In its formal meaning, hesychasm is a movement. It's an Eastern Orthodox monastic practices that goes back to at least the 14th century. I've been reading this year from a Celtic book of daily prayer. They give it a little bit of a broader meaning. It says this, that a hesychast is someone who pursues a life of inner stillness and quiet in order to listen to God with an open heart. And then it goes on to tell the story of a monk, so I can't get away from the monks. It talks about this monk who was tried to be a hesychast in his monastery, but he found that he had trouble with anger. He'd explode in rages quite a lot. So he decided to leave the monastery so he could live on his own, where he wouldn't have to deal with that inner turmoil of the anger. And then it goes on and says, one day when he had filled his water jug with water, he put it on the ground, and then it fell over. He picked it up, filled it up again, and it fell over again. Having then picked it up and filled it a third time, he put it down, and it fell over again. So he was furious, and he picked it up and broke it, which helped him realize that he actually needed his community to help him temper his temper. So, somebody got it. Thank you. We make each other better is the point. We support each other. Whatever else it is that we do when we gather together on Sundays, and there's plenty, we are here to nurture each other, to challenge each other, to encourage each other, to weep with each other, to celebrate with each other in the midst of the raging storms, our own personal, internal, interior turmoil, and the terrifying squalls of what is going on outside of these walls. In the midst of these raging storms, we can be present to each other and build a community that pursues inner stillness and quiet, so that people who find their way to us can listen for that which calls them into being, that which stirs the deepest parts of their hearts, that spirit that is the breath of us all and all of the world. We can be the boat. We can be the unremarkable angels. We can be the platform that Jesus stands on and yells out into the waves, "Hush, be still," and they settle down, maybe. But we can be the boat for people who don't have enough, for people who've been told that their love is wrong, for people who've been told that capital P, pride, is a sin, for people who have been told that their bodies, their families, their gender identities are all wrong, for people who are fighting to honor the earth. We can be the boat for each other. We can be the boat. That is God's good news. Amen.